So some of you guys may or may not know, and some still don't believe me, that I used a Total Gym or sliding bench trainer for the better part of 3 years, as I would say, really my only form of resistance training. Give or take some very few minor stints in some free weights and resistance bands, maybe other little modalities. I say only because really this was predominantly the only thing of resistance training, almost the only exercise outside of some little cardio here and there that I did for literally 3 years straight. Till about 2020 to I'd say roughly 2023. And that's when I really started implementing some other resistance bands, some isometrics and other just free weight machines that I was used to. Really the only reason for that predominantly was because I started moving back into this garage gym, which only until very recently I really committed to, and laying down mats and things and taking up this side of the garage of this 3-car garage. But despite these recent additions into my garage gym, actually recently I'm kind of going back to what I was doing before, because I honestly thought I saw a lot of great progress. I learned a lot of great lessons, some of which I kind of forgot about. So not just key lessons to adopt and get the most out of these machines that I always will say are extremely underrated, but also very key lessons to your training that I think have really changed the way I look and how I train myself and even others. Before I do get into those tips though, guys, as always, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing. If you like this content, drop a comment down below. Everything seen featured in this video can also be found down below in the description box for promo codes, especially exclusively some promo codes for this Evolve, which I do think is the best whole gym model at this point. But jumping into it, the first thing I would say is do not be afraid to try something different. Throughout my whole training career, yes, I started off with traditional free weights, bodybuilding type exercises, but I'm always open to trying different things, even recently things like high intensity training. Even though I don't agree completely with those things, I will listen, keep my ear open, and at least try different things to adopt into my own personal training. Whenever I've suggested this machine, it could be other things, even like resistance bands, sometimes people, it goes in one ear and out the other, don't consider it. But I think if you have some experience in the gym and you're somewhat creative, a creative-minded person, most people that I show that have some background knowledge of resistance training can definitely see some of the value that you can get out of these machines. They are not perfect, but the reason I even stuck with this thing, which I'll even get into it later, is because it works so effectively and efficiently in working the muscles I wanted, especially in a small gym space that I had in my basement with the equipment at my disposal at that time, which I think all of us know was going on in 2020 that allowed me to really kind of force myself to be creative and actually open my idea to this. The second lesson I would say is that you're not going to adopt this machine or anything else if you can't adhere to it. So the reason I really took off with using this thing is because even though I had other things at my disposal like power blocks, I even invested early on as another squat rack. And if you guys don't know, I purchased and sold all sorts of things because I was going to the gym and could never really commit to a home gym until obviously the lockdown stuff happened. But this thing would never have worked if I didn't stick with it and it wasn't something I could adhere to. So exercise adherence is going to be number one, because regardless of whatever you think is optimal or the best on paper, objectively, it comes down to the person. If you're not going to stick with it or use it, it doesn't really matter. The next lesson is something that I recommend and something that I could listen to myself, and actually probably in the future I will listen to it myself, is that more is not always better, but still add more tools when necessary. I kind of got really deep in the weeds with this thing and I really did love it. I forced a lot of things, even though I would try things like legs, which I would say, again, going back to legs a couple of workouts ago, you can still work your legs. There's some great workouts on here. You just don't get that same eccentric load that you get with free weights. So while I did incorporate some free weights, I was kind of resistant. I also didn't have the room for it. So my recommendation to many people, especially when it comes to external free weights or loads, resistance bands, is if you're adopting this or something else, definitely consider adding an additional tool to make up for those shortcomings versus just forcing creative ways around something that really could be taken care of if you add another tool. Now, with that being said, though, more is not always better. And I'd actually say, and some of you guys have commented and said, you looked better when you didn't have all this stuff. You had a better physique when you were just using the Total Gym. And I would say maybe that's partially true. There's some things that I will explore and talk about in a future video. But objectively, I would say my legs definitely took a hit. And I kind of sacrificed that. I knew that in the back of my head. I was used to do a lot of heavy weight training and leg stuff in the gym. And I figured, you know, my glutes and my legs are already kind of big. It's not really a priority at this point. I thought I'll jump back into it. Really took me a couple of years to kind of slowly start, I should say maybe a year, to kind of slowly start putting on some size back in my legs. So in retrospect, I wish I did add those tools in there. But at the same time, you don't need a lot of excess stuff, because sometimes excess stuff allows you to kind of push really important things like this thing that I think was getting a lot of results out of the picture. This next topic might be controversial, and this is something that maybe is inherent with these machines, because by nature there's not a lot of external weight, although you can add external weight with the weight bar attachment and resistance bands. Many creative ways you can do it, especially even detaching the cable makes resistance much harder. Oftentimes though, people realize that my training and training style and also recommendations, which I still do coach people if you're curious about this, kind of a skill base with this, I will say to a little bit of learning curve, is that I was definitely doing more higher repetitions, you could argue lower intensity. Now I wasn't going through the motions and seeing like I wasn't really feeling anything. In fact, a thing I often recommend to most people is that definitely change up the exercise if you're not feeling that connection to the exercise and the muscle, and that's definitely something I stuck with. Me personally, that's why I like this machine, because I always kind of found that connection, at least with the exercises that I chose. However, given the nature of this machine, I tended to always gravitate more towards higher repetitions and sometimes a faster tempo, another topic I've discussed at length. Now, I will personally say, as much as I've been exploring the high intensity stuff just for fun, and a lot of you guys are interested in this too, in fact, I've got other guests coming in the future, I will say personally, I saw great results, and even in the past, doing a higher repetition, you could say lower intensity by nature because you're not really using heavy weight, although I was getting kind of closer really to form failure, a lot of these things, types of sets. So long-winded way of saying that I definitely found and really thought my body responded very well to not only high frequency and high reps, but leading to that, my next point was I was also doing a lot of high frequency. Much more than I was used to, and that is again because I think this machine is not that demanding to your body. Now you might think, and people have said, well, you're gonna wear and tear your joints, you're gonna cause an injury. I never found that. I know plenty of people who do higher frequency workouts and they have zero injuries. In fact, some of the best people I know in great shape actually do higher volume, much more higher frequency repetitions. Conversely, I'm not saying you can't get results doing high intensity, low frequency workouts. I certainly did that probably the last 2 years, was probably predominant to that. However, I found that my zest, so to speak, of getting in there, wanting to train, and also just the way my body felt after those recovery sessions from training were just so much worse. When I've been jumping back into this and doing higher repetitions, lower volume, I feel like I have so much energy throughout the day. An old saying that many have said throughout the years has been, stimulate to annihilate, train, don't drain. Not leaving a training session like you got hit by a truck. And I can say that's what I felt like when I've been doing high intensity training. I will say though, I can see the progress and the merits of this type of training definitely pay off. And I just basically say, in a nutshell, I was finding myself training sometimes 4 to almost 7 days a week, not obviously the same body part, but much more higher frequency, and my joints and my body just felt fine. Of course, if something felt off or an exercise felt off, I just called an audible in that workout, either stop the repetitions, stop the sets, or if I just wasn't feeling that good that day, the workout would just be shorter. So very basic stuff of just listening to your body. That is not to say though, that's something I do regret that I recommend to most people, especially now, and I would say it in the past, I just wasn't the best person at doing it, is that I wish I was incorporating more heavyweight sets or training throughout the week. And that is basically what I'm doing. Years ago, I'd say maybe, over 7+ years ago, and basic stuff that I would do is I would do heavier stuff up front, all the major compound lifts at the start of the workout. Then the middle towards the end of the workout would be higher repetitions or lower intensity or moderate intensity type sets. And I found that worked really well as far as getting very strong, but still putting in decent work and feeling like my body could recover from that. So recently, and also like I said before, trying to put a little more size back in my legs and other areas I lost strength. Something that I wish I did not do was just neglect my heavyweight training altogether, because that is something now I'm peppering back into. And I do think there is a strategic way of incorporating both. Again, just listening to your body, but at the very least, try to incorporate some heavier weight sets into those workouts. Another point that I found, and most of the people get surprised by this, is whenever I would do a total gym workout is I wouldn't really mess too much with the incline settings. Yes, I would mess with it a little bit here and there if I wasn't feeling it in the muscle, but sometimes the setting, oftentimes I would say, is like 3/4 of the way high on the incline setting. And I would just go by just repetition and feel of the muscle. I would do a little more repetitions, a little more sets, again, to find that connectivity to the muscle on that day. And I find recently, even using things like my Ironmaster dumbbells, while they are not quick change and they take a little bit more time to kind of adjust reps, I'm doing that same approach now and I'm getting the same results. So I can leave the weight, say at 75 or jump up to 95 and then just do some more reps and more sets versus feeling like I have to kind of constantly switch out the weight. So that is something, again, that I find for most people just makes the workout a little more interesting and not as cumbersome, kind of changing repetitions. And also I'd say mentally, it's one last thing to think about. I know this doesn't seem like the most scientifically based thing of logical progression. However, I always believe if you're pushing yourself hard that day or fairly hard, I do think your body gets more conditioned and just stronger over time. You can handle a higher work capacity. That's a whole nother topic for another day that I think the total gym and moderate weight training or heavyweight training can do versus high intensity, lower frequency. I digress though. if you're going in, day out and putting in the work, I think your body will come back recovered and you can do more work. And that's certainly something that I found using this machine. The last lesson I learned, and I learned this maybe the hard way for the sake of kind of showing you guys new things, I only had one mode, was as much as I kind of would show some creative exercises, albeit a little cumbersome. When I said there's a lot of fluff exercises on here, towards the end of when I started training, I said really I only use a few, handful of exercises and kind of drill those in. I do think that is true. So my point is be creative, try different things. And I said the same thing as much with resistance bands. Try a variety of things that work for you, but don't lose sight of the most important thing, which is getting that connection to the muscle, that mind muscle connection, however you want to describe it. Basically, if you're doing an exercise to work a given body part, if you do not feel that body part being worked in any shape or form with any kind of variable you're manipulating, definitely change up something to make sure that you are feeling that muscle working. And the last and final point I will make, because I've heard this, maybe people say this in the past, but you can just look at my videos and see how things have kind of changed. Even personally, I just know it to be true. And of course, working with people throughout a better part of over 20 years, like working and training people in the gym and things like that, is that people will say, well, it's just your genetics, how you respond this way. I might respond a different way, of course, to my training and different variables compared to you are, but I can say for certain that my body type and genetics, or just when my body expresses itself, is definitely unique to the different demands placed upon it. So my point is just doing this for high repetitions, low intensity, compared to saying high intensity, low frequency, or doing some other thing, just free weights or bands, will not give me the exact same result, because I've definitely kind of seen that be the case. In fact, I've said many times, when I was at my strongest, I kind of looked at my flattest as far as my muscle definition. So I do think there's kind of a sweet spot. I think I know it works good for me. My point is this might not work good for you, but at the very least, hopefully you can try these things out and apply them to your own way of working out. But at the very least, keep an open mind, try different things. Don't be afraid to experiment with different things. And also, I didn't mention this, breaking the rules. I break the rules a lot in this thing, such as going from single joint exercises first, then to the multi-joint exercises. I do all sorts of things that I think at the end of the day, really did work well for me. So drop your comments down below. Sorry, that was kind of a rant session. Didn't want to say too much, but it is, I think, negative degrees outside. So my warm up from the workout is coming down to an end. I'm starting to get cold in here. I will see you guys in the next video.